I'm now going to invite our next presenter, Reem Fadda, a curator and art historian. From 2010 to 16, she has worked at the Guggenheim Museum as associate curator, Middle Eastern Art Abu Dhabi project. She also shared with us from her work there in the last edition where she participated. Also worked at Contemporary Art Paka Ramallah, served as academic director for the International Academy of Art in Palestine, Ramallah, and Reem has curated several international exhibitions and biennales. With us, she spoke about Jerusalem Lives at the Palestinian Museum, 2017, Not New Now, the 6th Marrakesh Biennale, the UAE National Pavilion for the 55th Venice Biennale. Reem has been awarded the 8th Walter Hopps Award for Curatorial Achievement in 2017 and is a 19th Fellow of the Young Global Leaders of the World Economic Forum. Currently, she is director of the Cultural Foundation in Abu Dhabi, and we are greatly looking forward to all that Reem has been up to there. Welcome.
Thank you. I just want to begin to say thank you for you, Natasha, Priyank, and Pratik for this invitation, for the entire team and family of Experimenter. It's always a pleasure to join everyone, and it does feel a little disembodied and disconnected to be speaking on virtually, but I do want to say I'm thankful for this opportunity because given COVID, I've felt that I've ever become more isolated, not just in my own body and with my community, but also in my own mind. Despite the openness of a lot of the virtual realm, these restrictions, our ability to see things, experience things, be with others is really limited. And I'm grateful for this opportunity, this kind of opening for my own mind and my own sanity to reflect, to think together with you, and to further kind of some critical thoughts that I have. I'm going to begin by just prefacing before I jump into my presentation. A lot of you already know my style of presenting. I'm going to take you around a couple of whirlwind ideas that have been, jumbling in out. Really the things that are preoccupying me, and at the same time, I'm trying to kind of navigate them into my own practice and in my new role as the director of the Cultural Foundation in Abu Dhabi. But also, how do I safeguard some of these ideas and, kind of push through with them despite locales, despite, circumstance, and really kind of persevere with them. And I just, to start with it, I really, we've been seeing a lot of what has been happening across the world from, this current pandemic, but also the various calls in the world of social justice that have started to really push through and resonate. And even, the push towards our own cultural institutions to respond to this need and this urgency. And in many ways, it's becoming a blessing to see this call really resonate in this fervor and with such strength. I'm always and have always been someone who's a advocate that our cultural and public kind of institutions and domains should always be an area of civic regeneration, of places for real kind of engagement with our society, and places for empowerment and agency. So this is something that I feel this has become a blessing, and I'm hoping that we all really persevere to make this chapter become a real U-turn in the practice of a lot of our cultural institutions. I'm gonna share my screen now with my presentation. Just give me a second, please. Sorry. Here we go. And okay, I hope you can see it. So starting with, finding myself in working with the Cultural Foundation, and this is an institution in Abu Dhabi that is definitely multidisciplinary and has a lot of areas of practice, from both a library, an exhibition and visual arts program, and at the same time, a performing arts program. And this institution is not a new institution. It's been built in the mid-70s with the kind of formation of the United Arab Emirates as a united nation. And it was really kind of spearheaded from the founding father, Sheikh Zayed, who thought about like an important modern institution that would become a center for cultural and community kind of gathering. It was designed and built by the Architecture Collaborative, from the house of the Bauhaus, and merging a lot of ideas of both Islamic design with modern elements of architecture. I'm not going to go into the kind of thinking about like the actual institution. This institution was closed off for a good 10 years and for renovation purposes. And it was one of the first preserved buildings for like modern architecture here in Abu Dhabi. But I took on the role to lead this institution in last September 2019. And it's been a privilege, but at the same time now with the given circumstances, there are a lot of things that changed. And just from this kind of facade, I just wanted us to think through those windows, these kind of larger windows, about some of the ideas that, as I said, are, kind of taking over my concerns and the way forward, and how do we really navigate these spaces, and how do we navigate even modern legacies, and how are we faithful to our audiences? How are we breaking down certain borders? So for me, it was very important, again, to think about this place as, and I just have these kind of little blurbs and bubbles that I thought, can start to consummate some of my ideas, and starting with thinking about the institution as a place of equity, as I had mentioned before, a place for social and civic engagement, a place where we are giving agency not just to artists but to a lot of stories, and a place for a specific kind of social responsibility. The common becomes an important area for a lot of this kind of the congregation of our publics. The building is open from all kind of facades and all doorways. It leads into this very kind of common space. So this is something that for me became very integral in the way I've treated that space and I've worked with it at the same time. And the way I want to even push its frontiers, so that it can really encapsulate further ideas of kind of breaking all those important boundaries and allowing for further inclusivity. I've someone who's spoken about this previously and this is something that I still firmly believe in, which is, concentrating on the now. So representing this institution as the place, the institution of now. My concern with this is really the idea of not, of course, not negating the past or not just reflecting on the future, but really being able to create moments of perseverance in the current moment. And this is something that it really insists on the necessity of living. And again, I've also talked about the concept of living as something that is philosophically something that is very important to me and continues to be important within the space, and now within the Cultural Foundation, as I see it, in this kind of open forum and this open building that allows for an engagement that I've not had the previous experience of working with. And at the same time, within this kind of perseverance of the now and focusing on our current moment, some of the ideas that also become really important is to maintain maintain an openness with our audiences, to break down our let's say barriers, I want to say both our conscious knowledge barriers, and at the same time creating a place for openness so that we allow this kind of accessibility to our audiences and further inclusiveness. It is a very important, I would say, concept for social responsibility, and a place for where we can really think of ourselves as being reflective and responsive. And coming to something that is very important for me, that is, some of the pillars, again, of what I want the Culture Foundation or the various institutions I'm working with in Abu Dhabi to also represent, which is the institution of knowledge. Recently watching a lecture by Achille Mbembe, he speaks about the regress of reason. And this is something that is, it's an important kind of element to think of it. Within what, Luli was referencing, the knowledge of land and these indigenous practices, and all of these really important elements that both combine this integral part with mythology and reason and intuition. And I think these are really important elements that we need to reframe the language of reason, and because they offer themselves as doorways, as openings to access multiple audiences. They provide a bridge, and I find that to be really, it's a very important thing for us to allow from that space, from that specificity, a place for that kind of imagination. So how are we able to help elevate the language of reason, but that which is completely rooted in land practices, in land knowledge, in habitability of the earth, in thinking about, the need that we are seeing societies, various kind of needs for mythology, but at the same time, how does this mythology grow its own roots? How are we opening that through the language of various artists, artist practices? I'm seeing fantastic new projects emanating from Palestine, be it Al-Bir Seeds project with Vivian Sansour that is working on a lot of, let's say, ecological projects. Even Emily Jasser's project with Dar Jasser has focused a lot on, let's say, also a lot of land projects and involvement of the community. Jumana Manna recently wrote a fantastic kind of essay thinking about indigeneity and land and cultivation and resources of language, and she's done multiple videos about that as well. So, there's an interesting kind of place where we have to look at what our artists and our communities are starting to really kind of produce. In Abu Dhabi, there is a very important, I would say, also a contemporary practice, a lot that is referencing indigeneity and tradition, and there is a need for that and a need to kind of elevate that language. And that need comes also from starting to break down those stereotypes and essentialisms. So this is something that is also quite important for us to kind of manifest. The last, of course, and it comes without saying, is this place becomes an institution of connection. So through knowledge, through the now, and through equity, we create a place where it becomes a safe haven for our audiences to become a part of our institutions, where these barriers, where empathy does become the doorway, where we do have, again, the social and civic, where we think about wisdom and nurturing. So these are really important elements for us to think about the way that our institutions become connected to our audiences in our society. And of course, and this is not to claim, that we've achieved all of this just yet within the Cultural Foundation or elsewhere, but I think, it's good to think about what are these kind of pillars of thought, what are our areas of focus, and how do we want to kind of steer ourselves moving onwards. And I'd love to hear thoughts from the audiences and, and critiques, and to think together with everyone about how can we push these elements even further. And just to kind of give you, I'm just going to kind of walk through a couple of one exhibition in quite a lot of detail, which is an upcoming exhibition. It's not the current one that we're opening next week, but it's the one that is upcoming in March, which is called Muhammad Shaba'a, the Visual Consciousness, in Arabic, Muhammad Shaba'a al-Wa'i al-Basari. And it would be opening in the spring of 2021 until the fall. And this exhibition is really taking one of the proponents of, I want to say, historical proponents. And this is my particular interest as well, as someone who is an art historian. And I've constantly kind of tried to reference a lot of what I've learned across my own journey in the arts from those interlocutors, those artists that have, they're like octopi. They are very well connected in their society. They're integral to the kind of consciousness of their own societies. And at the same time, they have a real kind of intellectual integrity and political integrity within their own society. And this is something that has always been a reference for me. Muhammad Shaba'a had passed away in the early 2000s, and he was a very important protagonist of particularly an art movement called the Casablanca Art School in Morocco that forged itself in the 60s. And its resonance is still felt today. And I wanted to walk us through this exhibition. And I have to preface by saying, I'm not the curator of this exhibition. We are collaborating with Zaman Books at the Cultural Foundation. And this is something that I'm hoping to be able to reinstate at the Cultural Foundation, which is creating a commune of curators that we work with that interrogate various kind of practices. And consider this as an open invitation to many of you to connect with us, and at the same time come with ideas, because we are very open to thinking together about those kind of marginalized stories and the studied stories that we would like to present. We are very much looking to the retrospective exhibitions because we feel that they have a condensation of both ideas, of practices. They're very kind of, it's like a lifeline of phenomenological representation of a place, of a person, of a society. And we feel that kind of condensation would be something that is really interesting to see and experience for our audiences, and gives that kind of in-depth knowledge that we're hoping to represent. Some of the follow-up exhibitions that we're looking to do, for example, is focusing on the practice of there was a fantastic kind of women group of artists in Jordan, of all places, starting with Fakhr-Nisa Zaid, but working with other people like Hind Nasser, Ufamia Rizzi, and Suha Shuman. And, this kind of commune and effective kind of group of women really influenced the entire cultural landscape in Jordan in particular, and extended itself across the Levant. Now back to Muhammad Shaba'a. So this is just to say, again, it's being curated by Zaman Books, and it's a collaboration with the Cultural Foundation. and Fatma Zahra Al-Khrisa, the curator, plus Murad Muntasami and our assistant curator from the Cultural Foundation, Noor Al-Mhirbi, are kind of working really hard on the aspects of the study of this exhibition for the past 2 years. And really, it spans the life of Muhammad Shab'a, who lived from born in 1935, passed away in 2013, and he spent his entire life as a key figure in the Casablanca Art School, and his contribution.
Sorry, Reem, do you want to change the slides? Sorry, just to check in with you because we're getting some.
Sorry, is it not changing?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm gonna go to, let's see, how am I gonna do this? Can you see it now? Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so basically,
Reem, would it be possible to be on full screen?
I was on full screen, but apparently it wasn't changing. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Is it clear? Can you just tell me if it's, I'm going to tell you when I'm changing. Just let me know if it's not changing for any reason.
Okay.
So yeah, so he was a key figure in the Casablanca Art School, and he had a very integral role in the contribution of the modernization of craft and post-independent Morocco, and really thought of kind of representing a transnational activism. And we really intended that through the showcasing of this astounding history of Shab'a, this exhibition sheds the light on his legacy and also serves as a tool to enhance more insight into the discourse of Arab modernism in the region. You know, we're showing a multitude of his practice. So from his painting to his graphic design, his interior design, archival materials throughout spanning his 50 years career. One thing I do want to mention is that he's someone who's really worked very hard on anchoring himself to a crafts practice. And that's something that I find really important. So thinking about indigenous practices, thinking about craft practices, thinking about the vernacular, thinking about labor. And this is something that was so important into the practice of Muhammad Shab'a. I just changed the slide. I hope you can see this. So this is just a kind of a larger outline of Muhammad Shab'a in that period, from studying in Rome, first studying in Tetuan and moving to Rome, and then returning to Morocco, forming and teaching at the Casablanca School in 1969.
We can't see the change in slide. One possibility is for the experimenter team to share the presentation in case it's, because right now it's not changed.
Okay, so I'll just use, I'm just going to do, I'm just going to use the actual slides from here without the presentation mode. Can you still see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just do this. So again, Muhammad Shab'a is someone who is very effective in both teaching and thinking together with a group of artists about this kind of cultivation of a new artistic language. So he began his career through also working as a graphic designer in a very important journal, Souffle Anfas, in 1972, and you know, has had quite an important career working both as a professor, as an editor, and he was also unfortunately jailed in 72 because he was part of that, part of the counterparts of Souffle, but he was also very outspoken during that period of time politically, and because the journal was banned by the local authorities. And he had really a prestigious career from there onwards, working as an artistic advisor, as a professor in Tetuan Fine Art National Institute, and really kind of worked in several kind of important posts, including the Ministry of Arts and Crafts. So we thought about this exhibition through a multitude of representations and chapters. starting with thinking about his early career from 57 and 66, and then through, and it's really a chronological order of thinking about the various important aspects of his career, from thinking about also staging the post-colonial debate in the 60s and the formation of the Casablanca School, and moving on to his own kind of evolution of his own kind of language of painting and the hybridity of his own plastic language. And ending with his own, again, eclecticism in his particular practice. And a lot of the themes that this exhibition will cover is, of course, the decolonization of art and its kind of art as a form of emancipation. We're thinking through this language of Arab modernism and postmodernism, the Bauhaus, visual activism, the vernacular forms that they're trying to kind of push forward as a collective and also as Shab'a individually. The Casablanca Art School is, it was really a kind of important radical pedagogical change to the Casablanca Fine Art School. And it started in, formerly the school was mandated by the French Protectorate in 1919, and the group of artists that were Farid Belkahia, Mohammed Melehi, and Shab'a, who really were very active in the school, thought to how would they start to push ideas that try to emancipate this formal, I want to say, European language of painting and practice, and push its boundaries to a modern vernacular affiliated to indigenous practices in Morocco, and at the same time represents this newly formulated independent political identity. We have to understand that this is also happening adjacent to the time Morocco gains its independence in 56. So this is a very kind of, an important time for this period. Here we have the three artists from Farid Belkahia here, Mohammed Melehi and Mohammed Shab'a together standing. And this is a very important kind of moment. And I've spoken about this briefly previously, because I'd also, the Casablanca School became something that for me was really, I want to say, it became like a watershed moment in my own life and career. And this is something that was very important. It like shook my very grounds. The Casablanca School in the 60s decides in 1969 in Jam' al-Ifna in Marrakesh to create an exhibition in the outdoors, and they hang their paintings in the middle of the center of this very, very public, uniquely public place, completely overthrowing ideas about conservation, of the maintenance of painting, and really allowing their paintings to be in this, the word in Arabic is so fantastic, al-ara, which means in this complete like nudity, but it's really meant to think about this open space with all of the elements and nature, and at the same time, the social kind of aspect of Jam' al-Ifna. For many of you who've seen pictures or have been to Morocco, you know that there can't be a more kind of public place as big as Jam' al-Ifna. And for this kind of area, they also wrote a manifesto emanating with a lot of from a lot of their ideas and their beliefs about bringing in the language of the vernacular in I want to say, a coupling to the modern, and thinking about how they push that boundaries to become more socially engaged and socially responsible towards their own society. And pulling that together. And for those who are know the practice of a lot of these artists, they're using multiple kind of materials, not just painting, and it's a fascinating kind of language that they've culled definitely from their surrounding. So this is a historic kind of image of them standing behind one of the kind of hangings of their paintings in the back. Back to Shab'a, in terms of his own practice and his literary works, he's someone who at the same time was very much a deep kind of intellectual who wrote quite a lot and publicly, and he wrote this very important book called The Visual Consciousness, and it's a collection of his own essays that he printed through newspapers or his engagement in Sufl. And this is the namesake of this exhibition comes from this book, so Al-Wa'i al-Basari bil-Maghrib. So this was something that we wanted to give also, let's say, a nod to the important kind of placement of this artist and intellectual within his own society, and his referencing of his own knowledge making. These are just for, again, some of the references. It's important, again, to say, and knowing Shab'a, knowing his work, these the cover image of Sufl, the magazine, and Fas, that was graphically designed by him, is his own kind of artistic practice. There is no hierarchy between what he would have regarded as important to represent, be it, again, his magazines, to his own paintings, to his interior designs, etc. So this is something that we also wanted to represent, and the exhibition will showcase these various kind of magazines and literary aspects and archival aspects of his own exhibition in the exhibition. These are some of the archival images. He, again, was someone who was very present, part of that mandate, part of thinking about, being present in the public space. Shab'a was available and created multiple murals. If you visit Asila towards the north of Morocco, you'll be able to see the remnants of a lot of the works of these artists. And there was particularly a cultural Musem, the Asila festival, that endorsed these artists and continues until this day. And they all have this kind of practice of painting on these these whitewashed walls of the beautiful kind of cityscape of Asila. Further archival images. And here we come to Studio 400, which is something that he also reinstated and really worked with a lot of his own collaborators and a lot of the craftsmen that were working with him. And this is something that I find quite important, that he really kind of insisted on this commune of his own practitioners and people that were working with him and fellow collaborators and artists. Interestingly enough, we're starting to see again this prolific kind of nature of studios happening in Morocco itself. This kind of legacy continues with many artists also kind of hosting their own studios and practices and working collaboratively with various artisans. So this is something, he's also produced, as we mentioned, several kind of interior designs and fabric and placed them in very public places. And there's a big discussion on how much that kind of output was equally regarded as his own kind of design and artistic work. Now we come to this period of how, the formation of Shab'a within his own exhibition, and this taking shape and looking at the the late 50s and early 60s of his own practice, having come back from, let's say, his encounters with post-World War II Western avant-garde movements in Italy, and referencing American abstract expressionism, something that remains with him, and at the same time thinking about calligraphic abstractions and thinking about the post-calligraphic at the same time. So and his influence also having also encountered a lot of thinking on the Bauhaus and the legacy of the Bauhaus, and these become important kind of formations in his own study and resonate in his own practices. But I think he also does a moment of unlearning. which is necessary. And from that, he really kind of pushes through with his collaborators to think about the practices in the Casablanca school and further on in the formation of their manifesto. But this is just to give you a sort of taste of his initial abstract works and practices. And we find in them, the kind of various influences in his study time, his study era. And now we come to really kind of, this is, I would say, an embodiment of who Shab'a is in terms of his language of painting and his kind of deep affiliation to thinking about the geometric, the references to craft practices in Morocco. And this is I would say this is the pivotal moment in his shaping of the Casablanca school. This painting in the middle was actually seen in the Jam' al-Ifna show and exhibition. And you find these kind of vibrant colors. A lot of the references are coming from designs from Berber and craft tradition in Morocco, and he really kind of thinks about it in a very kind of graphic way. So this is where it's quite important that he's pushing these kind of integrated artistic practices, as he called them, even forward. And then from there, he really starts to think about within his kind of own post-colonial thinking, how he wants to implement his design into Moroccan society and further exploring the graphic arts in transnational networks and venues. And it's very important to say that he was also very active within a lot of political and pan-Arab and even and also pro-Palestinian artist collectives, and it's many of his kind of graphic designs were posters that supported a lot of these causes during that period of time. This is more of him becoming one of the kind of leaders of the Moroccan art scene, and we start to see during this period of time his contribution again to the Festival of Asila and really working as a visual activist. And this is where we have Studio 400 and a lot of the kind of output where he's created this integrated art. He's helped to build hotels, public buildings, and really thought about this kind of vernacular modernism even within design and architecture. I just want to walk you through some of the images. This is his kind of further practice and his more kind of eclectic language in his own later life and practice of creating paintings and drawings. And you will see this, I want to say, a little bit more ethereal and universalist language starting to show its case in this kind of later period of his life. So, and as if he's also kind of going back to his own kind of gestural beginnings at the same time. So this is just, I just want to kind of walk you very quickly through the images. Again, these are some of the posters that he'd created. Here on the left, you see one of the posters for Palestine. This poster was in solidarity with the Chilean people. So, he was someone who was quite active on various transnational circuits. And some of the images of the brochures and archives and the magazines that he had a very important influence in producing. And again, some of the magazine archives. So this exhibition really is happening, I want to say, early next year, and for me represents, again, this kind of deep dive into a language of an artist that has been really important in establishing what does it mean to create a language that is rooted, that is related to various kind of societal practices. How do we push those languages of being with one another in a kind of unity, in equity, where hierarchies are completely, I want to say, broken down, and at the same time forging a language that is a new formulation, a post-colonial formulation of modernism that is more engaged with man than material, and thinking about, and when engaging with the material, really finds that that balance, that important kind of reference and rootedness with it, where one does not precede the other, where the object does not precede that which is the human and the interaction. I'm now going to jump you into something very, very quickly, because I know I'm going to be quickly kind of tight for time. But something that I'm going to take you into a little bit of a whirlwind from this kind of language of exhibitions within, the Cultural Foundation to its other, I think something that really kind of grounds me, which is the children's library that we have at the Cultural Foundation. And this is something for me that was important to reference, because it's something that also reminded me, I'm not just speaking to my peers, I'm not just speaking to the similar audiences, I'm not speaking in one language, I should not be monotone. When I think about curatorial practice, where do I think about responsibility? How am I thinking about engagement with society? What are the means for me to break down those barriers, and how are they manifest? This library was fully kind of ready by the time I came into the helm, but it's something that I wanted to kind of reference, because it's definitely become the gateway of where I had audiences coming into the institution. And this place that suddenly, manifested everything I kind of thought about, and never thought about it in this kind of way, but it's an area that has developed into a place of play and learning at the same time. We have around 50,000 books. We have these fantastic spaces that you'll be seeing here. They're all about like using play and learning at the same time. So it's not just about books and storytelling, but it's also about the engagement of bodies and play, and using that in the language of the development of the child and the family kind of activity. We have these fantastical spaces. This is called Creature Space, where we, have these kind of stuffed toys, and we have aquariums, and we have, fossils of imaginary creatures and ones that are real. And it's an area of exploration and talking to the children about that. And it's a fantastic kind of place of activation. On our usual days at the Cultural Foundation, we would welcome no minimum of like 1,000 to 1,500 people, mainly those that are coming to the library. It's a free space. The Cultural Foundation does not, charge for the library, the exhibitions. The only charge is for tickets for our performances in our theater, but the space of the library is free. It's a place that is very safe. This is a very kind of usual day at the library that you would see, with a lot of artistic kind of workshops. And I do want to say that thinking about indigeneity and pushing kind of the boundaries within these learning spaces. So even within Abu Dhabi, we thought about like manifesting the areas of the libraries to represent the dunes, the majlis, the tree mountain that is there, and creating these kind of spaces and safe spaces for learning for, again, the interaction of children across all ages and their families. We also incorporate ideas related to technology. So how are we doing with, editing, with VR, we have robotics, we have stop motion for children, and thinking about how are we kind of harnessing these into the, these new forms of knowledge, science and technology and STREAM to really kind of teach our children these kind of new methodologies. This is just an interesting image of the falaj, which is one of the indigenous kind of practices of saving water and irrigation in Abu Dhabi, that one of the areas was kind of established for. Really just, this is just, for me, the space of the library has become this important place for me to interact with audiences and think, how are we really engaging with these audiences to showcase a diversity of language, to have accessible forms of exhibitions, to think about the mainstreaming of our of culture, but at the same time not falling into the cracks of creating, I want to say, that which is banal or kind of at the same time essentialistic. So these are some of the important thoughts and ideas, and I welcome everybody for the discussion to further push me and push my ideas forward. This is just kind of end with a smiling face of some of the children that are part of it.
Thank you, Reem. It was really wonderful to learn of the exhibition, especially having been to Morocco, having been to Asila. One does think about also the way that the festival or the idea of the schools that are artist-led, the way that they define a certain aspect of modernism that has up to now been quite invisible within kind of global art history, even though it has regionally been so important. I mean, we can kind of compare also calligraphic modernism between Casablanca School and Pakistan. There are so many ways. And of course, there's people like Iftikhar Dadi and others who have done the research. So I'm really wondering how, in your current role, I'm assuming that the Cultural Foundation is not a collecting entity.
It's not collecting, but we do have an artist residency space, so it's also very important, again, as part of like making this place very lived and experienced by the various artists that used to inhabit it. And I want you to think with me like to Abu Dhabi in the early 80s, like everyone just came to the Cultural Foundation. So the artists, there was a community of writers that were there, it's a huge building, so they inhabited these various spaces. So back to that kind of ethics of the place, we wanted to maintain that. And we created an artist residency and gave spaces for artists to have studio spaces within the foundation. And as part of that, we really, part of that, and let's say as one of the kind of in the stipulations and agreements is that the artist will donate a work of their choosing to the organization. And that is where we want to build our legacy with our own kind of community of artists and representing them in the future. So that's where we're not collecting by actually, avidly collecting, but this is the area where we are collecting the work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm also thinking just in terms of exhibition practices then, not necessarily collecting, but this cross-referential mode, the mode of exhibition inquiry that expands the canon. One could perhaps also indicate the way that Casablanca School has been woven into Bauhaus Imaginista. And you mentioned, of course, also its influence on the Bauhaus. Could you perhaps talk a little bit more about such models and how they may have also inspired your own research?
I mean, part of the thinking for me about Shab'a was, or the Casablanca School, immediately, not just my own intrinsic knowledge of it and having inhabited, lived in Morocco, worked there. I know the scene very closely. I still have, my connections, and I go there. I consider it my second home, and I go there very often. But I found my new placement within an area that is this Bauhaus building, right? It's like the Cultural Foundation. Apologies for not showing further images, but it's very much a Bauhaus building, and its influence is that it's that integration that's been very important for Abu Dhabi, which is we want to maintain our identity and heritage and history. And how do we do that? Even from the 70s, like that conversation was essential for the knowledge making and the building of those edifices. And And that is a manifestation of that. So I thought, how brilliant would it be that we would have a retrospective by an artist who, had those same applicable conversation in relation to crafts and elevation of arts, and thinking about that in their own kind of context. But not to say that, Shaba's influence, Farid, Belkahia, Mohammed Melehi, may they all rest in peace. Like they were very influential across the entire Arab world. And I think, the remnants of their ideas and that kind of important intellectual rigor pushed through. And I wanted to be able to see that manifest again within the Culture Foundation to further enhance and support these ideas, and support a lot of still a lot of contemporary projects that we're working on to focus on national heritage, thinking about various kind of transnational practices, craft practices, artisanal practices. And I think these things are very important. I do want to say that within the area of where the Culture Foundation is in Abu Dhabi, it is right adjacent to Qasr al-Husn, which is the house of, this is the house of government from the 1770s in Abu Dhabi. And it's the first kind of important house of government that was established there in the heart of the city. And then the city kind of expanded from there. So you have to think about, like, we're there as the civic center of that society. We think of ourselves as like in the heart of the city. And that's how this kind of place really played out. So for us, it was very important to not negate that language, to keep on kind of moving that language. We also have a fantastic new institution that was built next to us, which was called the House of Artisans. So think about this as a full, circle for that block, this kind of park area of Al-Husn that really represents all these ideas and manifests them.
I can't help but wonder, also keeping in mind your position as a Palestinian curator, how are you able to navigate the aspect of the fact that this collective obviously was pan-Arab in its broadest sense of imagination and radicality, but also internationalist, and at the same time pro-Palestinian? I mean, how do we, through those cultural networks, continue to assert what we see as an ethical, vital position where there is, as we know, internationally a huge amount of pressure through Zionist powerful lobbies? And how do you face this today?
Well, that's a really tough question, but it's a very important and valid one. I think at this point in time, and I have to be very kind of self-critical to say, there's also, and this is something I even referenced when I started working back in Palestine, when I went there, and I definitely felt this kind of angst because, it's not just the conspiracy of the world, but it's our own conspiracy on our own selves. So I want to say that the political project has failed. Today, it's in its abyss. And we, as a Palestinian self-determination project, have failed. We are completely entrenched into a neoliberal economy and way of thinking, and we cannot see the light. There is no light in the end of that tunnel, as much as I want to call for that light. And the onus is not just on a larger international conspiracy, but the onus is on us as individuals, as my own generation that has not done any kind of collective way and thinking and practice to really kind of face this kind of this onslaught, and at the same time build our own way out of it. So yes, I want to say solidarity is, will constantly be essential for us as a cause, but what if the solidarity now finds no infrastructure to even build itself on from within us as a Palestinian society. I think there is the danger, and I think that's where we're not able to really further we can't harness that solidarity, and that for me is where I feel ashamed in a lot of kind of ways.
Thank you for that. It's a difficult one, and so we appreciate you answering and sharing where you are at with that. There's a question from Rohit Goel, who says, thank you so much. I wondered what it's like to work with aesthetics in such a contemporary space like Abu Dhabi, which is such a young nation. Is there an anxiety in the work of art there, given the Emirates' youthfulness? Sharjah seems to rest on its proletarian status vis-a-vis the other Emirates. I'm curious about Abu Dhabi. Really enjoyed the discussion on Shabba.
I think, I think basically the thing that I've come to discover in my years working in Abu Dhabi, and I've worked a lot of years alongside, the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project. So I've been back and forth in this country and city for the past 10 years. And I owe it a lot. I can't not say that. And at the same time, there is a firm belief about kind of a rooted cultural sphere that pushes its own kind of, I want to say its own essentialisms to something that goes beyond. And this is something that I really respect and see it happening in Abu Dhabi, but I see it happening and it treads carefully. This is not Dubai, this is not like, and Sharjah has done things in a remarkable way at the same time. But in Abu Dhabi, we also think very carefully about contingencies of our society, of our audiences. And it is a challenge. That's not to say that it's not a challenge, but it's a measured way of saying, how are we opening up? How are we kind of starting to really represent these contemporary practices? What are the sort of engagements that are really essential? Very rightfully so, it's very youthful. I find myself, old. I'm struggling at the same time, right? Like, how am I pushing my own, I want to say circumferences to go beyond this and speak to a language of youth, learn from the youth. And I think this is something that is, a requirement, and we're always reminded by this, even by our, the various kind of people that I work with in within the Department of Culture and Tourism, the management. It's something that is like, it's very important that we kind of push these frontiers even further. So that's just to kind of assemble whatever I can of an answer of this.
For your work towards the Marrakesh Biennale, and also as you shared in this specific presentation, there is this kind of tension in a sense. When you were last presenting, you were focusing a lot on ephemerality, on artistic process, on the fact that art is not built to last forever. Also, once again, considering a Palestinian subjectivity and the kind of destruction towards cultural knowledge. And so what does it mean then to inhabit a role in which you are building infrastructure? And that's not necessarily critique, it's in fact just a way of trying to understand how your position has also changed over time. And yet it feels as though you do have a focus on the applied arts. You're looking at living traditions, you're thinking through what it means to break these hierarchies of high and low art, also now from a UAE perspective as well. So if you could share more about that, that would be wonderful.
Great question, Natasha, and I think a very kind of valid question, because I've always thought about, where this important thing about thinking about, how are we preserving what is, I would say, human knowledge, right? Like, how are we preserving human knowledge, and how are we preserving human dignity above and beyond the material, right? Like, that's where I would always say that that's the important kind of way for us in our moving forward, in the way I want to articulate my own exhibitions. I want to articulate my own way of practicing the various kind of cultural projects or anything. And I would say that in its essence has not changed. And it's very important when you, I mean, hopefully you'll be able to come and visit and see the Culture Foundation for yourself, but it's not a white building. So you have these fantastic, this amazing atrium with the most intrinsic, it very much feels about like, it has like all these kind of Islamic architecture, zalij, the beautiful tiles in color. The space is very articulated as a lived space. And that's something that I feel very attuned with. And it's something that I feel I've not, let's say I've not compromised on my ethic about how do I inhabit that space. I don't encourage my team, I don't encourage the people that work with me to think in that kind of traditional format, but to really kind of try to push the boundaries as much as possible. And it's and I think about how are we inhabiting that space. And at the same time, I can't claim that I've arrived at a full, let's say, resolution, but it is important for me to think that, Shab'a did produce works that some of it will be maintained and some of it will be lived and used, and will, it will dissipate. And this is something that, at least the moment of making this exhibition about this work, is to say I'm trying to consolidate that knowledge of that practice. It's not to say that I want to, and that's not to say that I'm not involved in collection building, because I am still with the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi and other endeavors within the Department of Culture and Tourism in Abu Dhabi. I work on several projects, the Culture Summit of Abu Dhabi. I work on Manarat Saadiyat, I help with their exhibitions and programs. So I'm working on across a lot of the institutions. But for me, this point about, when I make a kind of statement about an exhibition in a retrospective, in that kind of studied format, I am trying to capture that moment of knowledge making, and that kind of dignity, that kind of human dignity that is really essential, without really thinking about, let's say, I'm not that invested within the cultural institution that I inhabit to think, how am I preserving it beyond that which is knowledge? That's the most kind of pivotal thing.
Sorry, I have to stop you because there's 3 questions and we have about 5 minutes to go. I'm going to try and bring the questions together. One is a practical question by Mosat, an artist, who asks, does the Culture Foundation give artists grants? I'm also wondering how local it is versus how open it is to other regions. Nobina Gupta says it's interesting to see the importance that you give to the cultural institution in terms of prefacing with knowledge building, vernacular practices, and dissemination of pedagogic models and engagement as well. How do you feel the post-COVID interactions with youth are going to be different? How do you plan to work on that within your institution? And the third question from Sujay is, there's a certain history of schools and artist-led organizations and the notion of art as a holistic continuum, all in reaction, anxiety, and discussion from a Eurocentric modernism, with which I should read your upcoming exhibition and resurrecting this figure. But are you thinking of bringing a dialogue between these strands?
To answer the first 2 questions, one about grants for artists. Yes, we do give grants largely for UAE-based artists, but we also do give grants to artists that we work with on our exhibitions or commissions. So that's something that we are working on, and it's not limited to UAE only, and it's not limited to visual artists only. So we also work with filmmakers and performance artists on commissioning and open calls. So follow us, and there are opportunities. And at the same time, in terms of the question about during COVID, we've had to transform ourselves. Our exhibitions have been our saving grace. We've been able to open the building, this big building, so it's been able to host people, but the library was closed. So we immediately transformed everything we could online. We created an online e-library immediately. So, and it's a fantastic resource. Please check it out, Abu Dhabi Children's Library. You'll have hundreds of thousands of ebooks available and videos, instructional videos and stuff that we are giving out for like children from all ages. And the art residency also transformed into an online. So our, let's say, younger artists that are working with us, we're still working with, you know, their house studios, but we were trying to give them as much curatorial engagement. I'm going to have to ask you to repeat the last question, please, because I got sucked into my own thought. Oh, I can't hear you, Natasha.
In terms of artist-led schools and artist-led organizations,
yeah.
More about how you actually would bring in these strands of the European and Pan-Arab, etc.
So, you know, I think, let's put it this way. The way I'm thinking about it is, and this is something that is very important and actually manifests itself even further with other institutions I'm working with in Abu Dhabi, which, and specifically the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi or the Louvre or others or NYU. And there's a lot that is happening in the scene and I'm engaging with it. For example, Salwa Miqdadi, the art historian and a professor at NYU, just opened the Arab Study Center, right? So the center will be kind of an invaluable resource to be able to provide that kind of in-depth knowledge. But the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, which will hopefully also open quite in the few years to come, also manifests a lot of these intersectionalities of studies and transnational kind of aspects of both interlocution and engagement between various schools of thought and practices and collectives of artists. And we'll be able to really manifest that in a fantastic way, either through the collection or through also studied exhibitions. For the Culture Foundation, as I mentioned, I am looking at art movements specifically. So I mentioned the show for the Jordanian kind of group of women from the 70s onwards. And at the same time, we're looking at a Tunisian modernism show specifically from the early 20s until the 70s. So we're really creating these kind of deep dives into the art movements in our entire region. And I'm someone who's invested in WANASA, so West Asia, North Africa, South Asia, and looking at that even particularly through the art movements and through the eyes of specific retrospectives of artists.
Thank you so much, Reem.